With a grueling pandemic and gruesome political season, you'd be forgiven for giving up on the idea of miracles. But tonight, we will take you to a place that's known for them. The sanctuary of Our Lady of Lourdes in southern France is the site of 70 medical miracles recognized by the Catholic Church.
What do we know happens to us after death? Regardless of what religion tells us, the mysteries of life and death have undoubtedly puzzled every life that walked the earth. Certainly, it is nature's rule that when we die, our physical body disintegrates into dust and becomes one with nature. But what if I told you there is one person who has defied the inevitable laws of death and the forces of nature? Since her death 140 years ago, the body of this young Catholic nun has refused to change, turning many to question the Catholic faith. But is this even possible? Or is it just a myth? Join us as we tell the strange story of young Bernadette Soubirous and the dark side of Catholicism. Bernadette Soubirous, frail in health. Bernadette Soubirous, born on the 7th of January 1844, was the eldest of 9 children from a poverty-stricken family. Her father was a miller and her mother was a laundress. Hard times had fallen in France, and the family lived in extremely poor conditions. Bernard Castereau, Bernadette's godmother and mother's sister, a moderately wealthy widow who owned a tavern, supported the Soubirous family as much as she could. But this didn't stop things from getting worse. By the time of the events at the grotto, the Soubirous family's financial and social status had declined to the point where they lived in a one-room basement, formerly used as a jail, called Le Cachot, the dungeon, where they were housed. Coupled with Bernadette's susceptibility to illness, it was especially hard. As a toddler, Bernadette contracted cholera in the epidemic of 1854 and also suffered from asthma and other ailments throughout her life. Probably due to her sickly nature, even at 14 years of age, Bernadette stood only 4 feet 7 inches tall. When telling the story of Bernadette, she is often presented as a poor, frail, and ignorant girl living in miserable conditions in the cachot. While this is true, it was not always thus. When she was born on the 7th of January 1844 at the Beaulieu Mill, Bernadette was the first child and heiress of François Soubirous and Louise Castereau, who married for love. Bernadette grew up in a close-knit family in which she was cherished. 10 years of happiness in the decisive early years of her childhood made her strong and surprisingly balanced. The descent into the unhappiness that followed could not erase this human richness. She had a lively, spontaneous, and generous nature, witty and incapable of deception. A strong personality, but unsophisticated. Growing up, there was no school for Bernadette as she had to help her Aunt Bernard. At 14, Bernadette could neither read nor write and suffered extreme exclusion from her peers. She struggled with catechism too because her memory refused to retain the abstract phrases. But later on, Bernadette will go on to have her first communion on the 3rd of June 1858. That same year was when it all began. The strange visions. One fateful Thursday afternoon on the 11th of February 1858, 14-year-old Bernadette was sent with her younger sister, Toinette, and a friend to gather firewood near the grotto of Massabielle. While the other girls crossed the little stream in front of the grotto and walked on, Soubirous stayed behind, looking for a place to cross where she wouldn't get her stockings wet. She finally sat down to take her shoes off to cross the water and was lowering her stocking when suddenly she heard the sound of rushing wind. The weird part, however, was that despite the strong wind, nothing moved. A wild rose in a natural niche in the grotto, however, did move. From the niche, or rather the dark alcove behind it, just above the rose bush, came a dazzling light and a white figure in the form of a woman. Bernadette described her as an exceptionally beautiful young lady wearing a white robe with a blue sash. Yellow roses covered her feet. A large rosary was on her right arm. The beautiful lady smiled gently at Bernadette before making a sign of the cross with her rosary of gold and ivory. Confronted by such mystery, like every normal person, Bernadette was startled. Believing herself mistaken, she used all her human resources to discern the sight. She looked, she blinked, she tried to understand. At last, she turned to her companions to check their impressions and asked if they saw anything. To her shock, they stated they had seen nothing. Immediately, Bernadette fell to her knees, took out her rosary, and began to pray. Bernadette later described the woman as uo petito damisello, meaning a small young lady. Though her sister and friend claimed they were unable to see her, Bernadette knew what she saw was real. This was the first of 18 visions of what she referred to as aquero. Bernadette turned to the church and took advice in confessing to Father Pomian about what she saw. 3 days later, Bernadette, her sister Marie, and other girls returned to the grotto, where Bernadette immediately knelt, saying she could see Aquero, the small young lady, again. She fell into a trance, but when one of the girls threw holy water at the niche and another threw a rock that shattered on the ground, the apparition disappeared. On her next visit, which occurred on February 18th, Bernadette said that the vision asked her to return to the grotto every day for a fortnight, 14 nights. With each visit, Bernadette saw the lady, and this period of almost daily visions came to be known as La Quinzaine Sacrée, the Holy Fortnight. Bernadette's visits became so frequent that her parents became worried and deeply embarrassed, especially her mother, who records say had even hit at a point just to stop her from going. For all they knew, their young daughter could be declining mentally. However, although they tried forbidding her from visiting the grotto, they were unable to do so. Words spread like wildfire, and soon nearly everyone knew of Bernadette's visions. The supposed apparition did not identify herself until the 17th vision, and so Bernadette didn't realize who she was. Although the townspeople who believed she was telling the truth assumed she saw the Virgin Mary, Soubirous never claimed it to be Mary, consistently using only the word aquero. Questioned by Commissioner Jacomet, she insisted with confidence, saying, "Aquero, I didn't say the Holy Virgin." "Monsieur, you've changed it all." Even though many did not believe her, she reported what she had seen with astonishing calmness, saying she was only charged with telling them and not with making them believe. Soubirous's story caused a sensation among the townspeople, who were divided in their opinions on whether or not she was telling the truth. Some believed her to have a mental illness and demanded she be put in an asylum. Bernadette carried on with her visits regardless, and on February 25th, she claimed to have had a life-changing vision. She explained that the vision had told her to drink the water of the spring, to wash in it, and to eat the herb that grew there, as an act of penance. To everyone's surprise, the next day the grotto was no longer muddy, but clear water flowed. You won't believe that today that muddy land has become a large spring that millions of people visit, and many have experienced miraculous healing. But even before then, astonishing healings began almost immediately in the miraculous water at the shrine now known as Our Lady of Lourdes. Ever since Bernadette first caused the spring to produce clean water, 69 cures were verified by the Lourdes Medical Bureau. And after what the church claimed were extremely rigorous scientific and medical examinations, no one was able to explain what caused the cures. The Lourdes Commission, which initially examined Bernadette, ran an analysis on the water, but was only able to determine it contained a high mineral content. Bernadette believed it was faith and prayer that was responsible for curing the sick. Church authorities and the French government rigorously interviewed the girl, and by 1862, they confirmed she spoke the truth. Again, on the 2nd of March, at the 13th apparition, Bernadette told her family that the lady said that a chapel should be built, and a procession formed. She asked the local priest to build a chapel at the site of her visions, and the sanctuary of Our Lady of Lourdes is now one of the major Catholic pilgrimage sites in the world. Many other chapels and churches have been built around it, including the Basilica of St. Pius IX, which can accommodate 25,000 people, and was dedicated by the future Pope John XXIII when he was the papal nuncio to France. The little town of Lourdes became the site of pilgrimages, similar to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, attracting millions of faithful Catholics every year. Miracles were reported at the shrine and in the waters of the spring. The 16th vision, which Soubirous stated went on for over an hour, was on the 25th of March. According to her account, during that visitation, she again asked the woman for her name, but the lady just smiled back. She repeated the question 3 more times, and finally heard the lady say, in Gascon Occitan, "I am the Immaculate Conception." Despite being rigorously interviewed by officials of both the Catholic Church and the French government, she stuck consistently to her story. Few visions have ever undergone the scrutiny that these appearances of the Immaculate Virgin were subject to. By 1862, after a thorough investigation, church authorities would eventually confirm the authenticity of the apparitions. On the 7th of April, Soubirous had another vision, during which her hand was not burnt while being in contact with the flame of a candle for several minutes. At this point, was rapidly gaining attention and fame from far and wide. Once word of the apparition spread, people gathered in large numbers at the grotto when Bernadette was there to talk to Our Lady. Some of them believed that the lady was there too, even though they didn't see her. On the other hand, the doubters mocked her. It even took time for Bernadette's family and priests to believe that she was seeing the Blessed Virgin Mary. The local government, however, saw her as a nuisance. The mayor of Lourdes barricaded the grotto and fined people for talking about the apparition. He wanted to arrest Bernadette, so he attempted to frame her as a crazy troublemaker. But there was too much opposition from citizens and her priest. On the 8th of June 1858, the mayor of Lourdes decided to barricade the grotto and put guards to prevent public access. On the 16th of July, Soubirous came back to see the grotto from the other side of the river and experienced her 18th and last apparition of the lady. Severally, she recounted these visions to many, but was she believed? The fame of it all could either bring her good or evil, and you are about to find out which. Bernadette's fame and convent life. What made Bernadette's claims more believable was that her accounts of the apparitions were precise, never adding or retracting anything. She steadfastly defended the genuineness of these visions and faithfully transmitted Mary's messages. In his pastoral letter on the apparitions, Monsieur Lawrence emphasized the simplicity, the candor, and the modesty of this child. She recounts it without affectation, with a touching innocence, and to all the questions put to her, without hesitation, she gave clear, precise responses, impressed with a strong conviction. Unaffected both by threats and attempts to bribe her with advantageous offers, Bernadette's sincerity is irrefutable. She did not want to make a mistake. But was she mistaken, or a victim of hallucination? The bishop was puzzled. He recalled her calmness, her good sense, the absence in her of any exaltation, and also the fact that the apparitions did not depend on Bernadette. They happened without Bernadette expecting them, and in the fortnight twice when Bernadette went to the grotto, the lady was not there. Bernadette had to respond to the curious admirers, journalists, and others to appear before civil and religious commissions. She found herself thrown into the glare of the news. A media storm battered her. She needed patience and humor to stand firm in this storm and to preserve the purity of her testimony. She accepted no payment, and she did not bless the rosaries thrust at her either. In these circumstances, life in the cachot was no longer possible. Bernadette was not comfortable with the attention she was getting, and it was necessary to protect her. Father Péramali and Mayor Lacade agreed that Bernadette would be admitted as a sick, poor person to the hospice managed by the Sisters of Nevers. She arrived there on the 15th of July, 1860. At 16, she learned to read and write. One can still see today, at the Bartra Church, the writing practice strokes she made. Later, she wrote often to her family, and even to the Pope. She visited her parents, who had been rehoused in the paternal home. It is also worthy of note that Bernadette had strong opinions about paintings of Our Lady. This shouldn't be a surprise since she saw Mary with her own eyes. Think about it. Would you appreciate paintings of your loved ones by people who never saw an image of them? The only image Bernadette would pray in front of was Our Lady of Cambrai. Tradition says that the evangelist Saint Luke painted this image, given that Saint Luke likely knew Jesus' mother in person. While at the hospice, Bernadette also considered joining the Carmelites, but her health was too fragile. On July 29, 1866, Bernadette took the religious habit of a postulant and joined the Sisters of Charity at their mother house at Nevers. Her mistress of novices was Sister Marie-Thérèse Vauzeau, and the Mother Superior at the time named her Marie Bernard, in honor of her grandmother. Bernadette spent the rest of her life there working as an infirmary assistant, and later a sacristan. People admired her humility and spirit of sacrifice. Her own illness made her a regular patient in the infirmary, and then there were endless parlor visits. And after having been an assistant infirmarian, she entered bit by bit into sickness herself. She did her work in all this, accepting all crosses for sinners in an act of perfect love. Sadly, it didn't last for long. The passing and crowning of a child saint. As Bernadette continued in the service of God, she was unfortunately diagnosed with tuberculosis of the bone in her right knee and was eventually no longer able to take part in convent life. She died in the Sainte Croix Infirmary of the convent of Saint Gildard at the age of 35 on April 16, 1879, while praying the Holy Rosary. Even on her deathbed, Bernadette suffered severe pain, keeping with the Virgin Mary's admonition of penance. She proclaimed, "All this is good for heaven." Bernadette's last words were, "Blessed Mary, Mother of God, pray for me, a poor sinner, a poor sinner." The nuns of Saint Gildard, with the support of the Bishop of Nevers, applied to the civil authorities for permission to bury Bernadette's body in a small chapel dedicated to Saint Joseph, which was within the confines of the convent. Permission was granted on April 25, 1879, and on April 30th, the local prefect pronounced his approval of the choice of the site for burial. On May 30th, 1879, Bernadette's coffin was transferred to the crypt of the Chapel of Saint Joseph, where a very simple ceremony was held to commemorate the event. As part of the canonization process, her body was exhumed 3 separate times, in 1909, 1919, and finally in 1925. It will shock you to know that a whooping 30 years later, Bernadette's body was largely intact. On September 22nd, 2 doctors and a sister of the community exhumed her body. They claimed the crucifix and rosary she carried had been oxidized, but her body remained incorrupt. Her skin had the same color as that of a living person. Her body was pronounced by the Church as officially incorrupt. The incorruption was cited as one of the miracles supporting her canonization. The group washed and redressed Bernadette's body, then buried it in a new double casket. The Church exhumed her body again on April 3, 1919. In the words of the attending doctor who examined her, "The body is practically mummified, covered with patches of mildew and quite a notable layer of salts, which appear to be calcium salts. The skin has disappeared in some places, but it is still present in most parts of the body." After a few ribs were removed to be sent to Rome as relics, it was decided that the blackish color of her face might be off-putting to pilgrims, so a light wax mask was in order. Her new face and hands were designed by Pierre Imans, a designer of fashion mannequins in Paris. In 1928, Dr. Comte published a report on Bernadette's exhumation in the second issue of the Bulletin de Association Médicale de Notre-Dame de Lourdes, where he wrote, "What struck me during this examination, of course, was the state of perfect preservation of the skeleton, the fibrous tissues of the muscles, still supple and firm, of the ligaments, and of the skin, and above all the unexpected state of the liver after 46 years. One would have thought that this organ, which is soft and inclined to crumble, would have decomposed very rapidly or would have hardened to a chalky consistency. Yet when it was cut, it was soft and almost normal in consistency." I pointed this out to those present, remarking that this did not seem to be a natural phenomenon. In 1925, Bernadette's body was exhumed yet again. This time, relics were sent to Rome, and an imprint of her face was molded, which was used to create a wax mask to be placed on her body. There were also imprints of her hands to be used for the presentation of her body, which was placed in a gold and crystal reliquary in the chapel of Saint Bernadette at the Mother House in Nevers. The Church proclaimed her a saint on the 8th of December 1933, not for having been chosen for the apparitions, but for how she responded to that grace. She was canonized by Pope Pius VI, who authenticated her visions and the veneration of Mary as Our Lady of Lourdes. Celebration of her feast is optional in the Roman calendar, though Lourdes is a major pilgrimage center for those seeking healing. The chapel of the St. Gildard Convent, Nevers, contains her body, which is said to be incorrupt. After this occasion, she was placed in a gold and glass reliquary at the mother house of the Sister of Nevers, where she appears to be sleeping even to this day. The undeniably beautiful 30-year-old body of Bernadette Soubirous is displayed in a purpose-built crystal coffin, housed in a chapel at the abbey where she served as a nun. Her uncannily lifelike visage, clad in nun's robes, is one of the most commonly used illustrations of incorruptible saints whose bodies never decay. Saint Bernadette is often depicted in prayer with a rosary or appealing to the Holy Virgin. Saint Bernadette is the patroness of illness, people ridiculed for their piety, poverty, shepherds, shepherdesses, and lords, France. Similar to how the Father did not allow Jesus' body to experience corruption while in the tomb, God provides that the bodily remains of some of his faithful ones will not undergo bodily corruption. Some might attribute the apparent miracle of bodily incorruption to scientifically explainable reasons, yet to date, no explanation has been provided. In addition, Saint Bernadette died long before modern embalming processes, which themselves delay but do not ultimately prevent the decay of one's bodily remains. In the realm of Catholicism, an incorrupt saint is one whose body experiences little, no, or delayed decomposition after death. It is believed that divine intervention has allowed several human bodies to forego normal decomposition. Many bodies of saints remained fresh and flexible for years, or even centuries. After explaining both natural and artificial mummification, the incorruption of the saints' bodies fits neither category but rather constitutes a much greater phenomenon that is unexplained by modern science to this day. It is important to note that the state of being incorrupt hinges on putrefaction. Not every saint who is judged incorrupt looks like they just walked the earth yesterday. The incorruptible bodies of saints are a consoling sign of Christ's victory over death, a confirmation of the dogma of the resurrection of the body, a sign that the saints are still with us in the mystical body of Christ, and proof of the truth of the Catholic faith. For only in the Catholic Church do we find this phenomenon. It is without doubt that Saint Bernadette had lived a life worthy of emulation for all Christians, dedicating her life to the course of heaven notwithstanding the suffering it brought her. She is indeed our kind of saint, and in the words of faith may she intercede for us all. Thank you for watching.